Hey, beautiful human. Welcome to the third episode of From Chaos to Cozy, where we're on an amazing journey gaining clarity around our chaos and how to see our cozy more clearly. In the last episode, we chatted about our shadow, how it's our friend and not our enemy, that our higher self actually completes and fulfills our human shadow self. And we'll definitely talk more about this as we move along our path from chaos to cozy, as it's such a huge part of that adventure. I briefly mentioned that our child selves are part of our shadow, and we do have several versions of our child self within us, but we could group them into three categories. We have the emotional child self, which has been said to be formed around 7 years old and younger, and even involves the womb, being in the womb. The second is the mental child self, which starts to form around 7 years old, all the way up to around 14. And then thirdly, the physical body child, which is formed from 14 to around 21. That's our hormones and everything being grown and our physical, being formed. So after that, we're pretty much echoing the first 21 years of our lives until we begin to question our emotions, our thoughts, and physical expressions of all these influences, and also the energy that we're focusing on in each moment. So we'll get more deeply into that in future episodes as well. Now, I mention all of this now because in this episode, we're going to be talking about the darkest time, the time when we feel so low and fearful in our lives that we either opt out of this life or something happens to turn us around from heading away from the light of unconditional love, and we start zigzagging backward toward it. And we get to these low points because of the emotional and mental beliefs that are formed in our child selves during those earlier times in our lives. We're taught things are, quote, good and, quote, bad, and if certain things happen, then we're good or bad. And we're usually taught it's all or nothing, black or white, pass or fail. Grading systems in schools defining us as better or worse than others. And we don't know any better as children. We're given all these popular opinions from the outside world, and many of them have been handed down blindly from generation to generation. Parents and family, schools, religions, belief systems, movies, books, TV. Those are some of the big ones that provide us their uninherited opinions, and we take them on as our own as well. And, when parents are having children, which is usually in their late teens, 20s, 30s, etc., they haven't had a whole lot of time or opportunity to reflect inward, to question their own beliefs. So they kind of donate all those opinions and beliefs to their children through praise and punishment conditioning, just as it was done to them and to their parents and their grandparents, etc. And I have a theory of that's why a lot of times grandparents get along better with their grandchildren than their own children, because they evolve through their later years, and children tend to pendulum to the opposite of their parents, vowing, I'm not going to be anything like my parents in some way. And we usually overcorrect so that our own children also want to be opposite of their parents, right? So that makes them more like their grandparents. So what a circus, right? Now, we can be gentle with our human side, our shadow, because it's designed to compare and contrast. That's why we come here, to experience the opposites of who we truly are by experiencing what we are not. Having peace with that helps me not be so hard on myself when that judging side of me kicks in. I realize, it for what it is. I embrace my shadow. I take some deep breaths. And then I come back to unconditional love when I'm ready to. And the outside world is structured in this way, with so many roles, opinions, supposed tos, need tos, have tos, musts, and shoulds, and also filled with contradictions, because not everyone has the same viewpoint or opinion about things. And we eventually get so disappointed, so exhausted or fed up with trying to live up to all those things, fearing that we will let someone down, and then we're nudged to turn inward. And this is where the dark night of the soul comes in, or the dark days, the weeks, the dark years, right? And we're pretty much taught to look outside of ourselves, to define ourselves, and to find that which is supposed to make us feel whole. We long for the eternal and the unconditional perfect love from back home. And unless we come across an enlightened master or soul, we won't experience or find that unconditional love out there. And if we do, for some odd reason, a slim chance, it's not for very long at all. Again, it's why we come here, for that adventure. Back home on the other side, we feel wholeness, completeness, empowerment, endlessness, and joy, joy, joy. We don't realize it, though, because we don't know any different, so we come here to experience that difference. And it's like breathing air here on Earth. We don't realize we're breathing air till we're 6 feet underwater looking up at air and say, there is air, because this down here is non-air. So we gain a new appreciation for both as we begin to swim back up to where air is. And we're taught to try to have certain circumstances happen in the outside world in order to be happy, because we're taught that certain circumstances have to happen in order for us to be happy. One of the challenges with that is that everything on the outside world is temporary and unfulfilling. We're looking for eternal, unconditional love. And all the outside world consistently has to offer is temporary, conditional love that can be lost quickly if gained at all. And that is what takes us eventually into our darkest times, which is a blessing in disguise. So let's talk about my darkest time. All right, so let's reflect a little on the darkest time in my life. And have no fear, we got some great flashlights that'll shine bright as we reflect upon the dark drama on the dark stage at that time. And the main source of my darkest time had to do with organized religion. And please know, I don't condemn organized religion at all. It is part of the journey of humans and also an introduction to spirituality for many of the human race. It is a great starting point for our relationship with the spirit world, but it doesn't stop there. It's like going to a party where friends or family, or even sometimes strangers, want to introduce you to someone who they think is very important to meet. And they have their own opinions on who they are to them and how they are to the world. So some may say, they're so loving and kind and generous, but, also don't make them upset or there will be punishment. And then you meet them, God, the Creator, whoever they introduce you to, and you discover that as you get to know them personally, that they're not quite the way that everyone was telling you that they were. And if you don't take the time to get to know them personally, you'll still believe the rumors and opinions of others that they had for God or them. And that is what happened to me up to this point. Prior to age 13, I wasn't really aware of any spirituality except for a few faint memories when I was a toddler, when my parents were going to the Lutheran church at the time. But the pastor had judged salesmen from behind the pulpit, of which my dad happened to be one of, and also had talked about how bad fences were. But the pastor had one of the tallest fences around their house in the neighborhood. So that was it for religion until we moved to Texas and my mom became a born-again Christian. That's when I was around 13 years old, which meant also my older brother and I also became born-again Christians. My father was a bit detached from the family at that time, busy being an entrepreneur, doing his business, so he didn't really follow suit and join that bandwagon at the time. But just as I was introduced to organized religion, I also hit puberty. Whoa! And I started having attraction to the same sex. It was an awesome experience beginning to feel these feelings while at the same time being taught that the Christian God thought it was an abomination. Now I said amazing because I was being facetious. But at first I thought it was a good thing because, when they talk about the abominable snowman, I thought he was pretty cool. But I quickly discovered the definition of abomination, and abominable was not kind and loving like I thought Jesus would have meant. So I kept this information to myself, of course, and this was back in the 80s when it was not cool to be gay, as it is today. Well, much more cooler than it was back then. I begged the Christian God every day to take these feelings and thoughts away, but to no avail. One Christian belief that was bouncing around that at the time was that sometimes we're given a thorn in our side, something to bear, some sort of sacrifice to God through our lives. So I thought, this was mine. But that didn't keep a young teenager from fantasizing and asking for forgiveness over and over again, punishing myself so harshly. Fearing that I would be punished in hell because of these feelings I could not help having. And I didn't realize how set up I felt around all this. I didn't feel like I asked for these feelings at the time and thought God gave them to me and then was threatening to punish me if I acted upon them. And maybe even for just having the thoughts, because another Christian belief at the time was that God knows your thoughts and heart and will judge you the same, even if you do it outside of yourself or inside of yourself. That was a tough thing for a young teenager to go through. And I guess I don't really need to mention how stressed and full of fear I was. Teenage suicide among gay teens was high back then, and it is still a significant thing in the world even to this day. And I'm very glad that the world is becoming more and more loving and accepting of each other, and that there are organizations that are specifically there for teens to help them see how amazing they are and to keep them from ending their lives. I, however, did not have access to anything like this at the time, and no one really to talk to about this except a Christian God who I thought was disgusted by me. So at age 22, 9 years after not acting out of my feelings with another human, my best male friend made the moves on me, and I ended up engaging in some physical interactions with him. I loved him. I wanted the interaction to happen, and I didn't resist. But after a week, this dream-like shock wore off, and I totally freaked out. The fear came flooding in that I was letting God, my family, and really the entire world down. And I just knew they were all going to find out, and I was going to be outcast or maybe even stoned outside the city gates. I was so scared of not meeting up to that long list of rules I had been given that rather than face up to everyone, I was going to choose the flight in that fight or flight fear mode I was in, and I was going to end my life. I was laying on the floor of my bedroom crying and in deep fear. I was thinking about all the ways I could end my life, but I also didn't want anyone to find out why I was ending my life, and also not having someone find my body and impact them for the rest of their lives. Yeah, even in my plans of ending my life, I was still trying to be a people pleaser. And I had one of those Suzuki Samurai Jeeps that back then were known for flipping, so I thought that would be the perfect way I could do it, make it look like an accident. And my mom would even get double life insurance payout because it was an auto accident. I did think, though, what if I didn't do it right the first time and it was crippled from the neck down? How would I end my life then? So it was a very, very dark part of my life. I would have to say, up to this point, the darkest part of my life. I had never felt fear this deeply or felt that helpless before. But it was in that moment that something happened that made me not move forward with ending my life. I felt something drop in through the ceiling. It was invisible, like a giant expanse of electricity, some sort of electricity field that fell all the way to the floor where I was at, and it felt like it filled the entire room. I couldn't move. I was not afraid, as it felt so warm and loving. And then deep within me, I felt within the deepest part of me, just a simple, gentle word that said, no. And I knew inside of me that this was God, whoever that was, but it felt different than the judgmental God I thought I would have turned their back on me. The energy slowly dissipated as I came out of fear. I gathered myself and then began begging God to forgive me over and over and over again, telling him that they could even send me to hell and replace my soul with an angel so they could use my body to help others, not go through what I was going through. And well, of course, that didn't happen because I by no means am an angel. But that began my journey coming back from the chaos, and a step-by-step program of the Creator and my spiritual entourage helping me deprogram from a life ruled by small t truths rooted in fear, and becoming more and more aware of the capital T truth rooted in unconditional love. And it didn't happen overnight. Not that it couldn't. I mean, maybe we have had lifetimes where we do have things happen overnight, and maybe they are boring because don't we really like learning the long and hard way? I feel like we learn things so much more deeply when we take our time to experience it all. And experience it, I did. In addition to asking God to forgive me every day and several times a day, whenever I would think about what I had done and that I was still struggling with those thoughts and feelings towards men. They didn't just go away. So I thought it would help if I dated a Christian woman. I liked a young woman who lived a couple hours away in a Texas coastal city, which of course was pretty convenient. And being a young Christian man, it was looked upon as so holy of me not to want to make out and do things we should wait for until we were married. So I knew her through the job that I had at the time, and I had met her once in person when I was down visiting the store that she worked at. And we talked a bit over the phone. These were the days before cell phones and computers, so it wasn't as often and easy as it was now. But at some point, she invited me down to visit her, and she lived with her parents. And even her mom said that I could stay in the house with them in their guest room. That was a miracle in itself, because she was very strict. But a few more amazing things happened also during that week. the night before I was going to drive down there, I was praying to God and worshiping Him with some Christian worship music. I really enjoyed the kind that was all about expressing my love to God and going into His throne room and sitting on His lap like a little child. You know, it was so amazing this night too, especially so. And I felt like God was right in front of me listening to me. And I had asked Him to forgive me once again, as I did quite often. And I also asked Him to show me His will for my life and some other things. And like I said, it felt like He was really, really listening. And then I went to sleep and I woke up the next day excited to see what journey this was going to bring me. And so I went down to Corpus Christi, where I was going. And while I was there, her parents asked if I'd like to go with them to a Wednesday night church service at their Pentecostal bilingual church. And Pentecostal churches move in what they call the gifts of the Spirit, which is a lot of what I had experienced at my non-denominational Holy Roller Christian church as well, kind of considered Pentecostal in a way. So I told them that I'd love to. You know, it doesn't hurt to get brownie points with the parents if you're looking at having something unfold in the future, right? So I went shopping to get some church appropriate clothes because I'd only brought like shorts and a tank top, not thinking I was going to do anything socially outside of hanging out with, you know, my friend and her family. Then Wednesday night arrived and we went into the church, filling up the back pew with her mom and dad, her sister and her sister's boyfriend, her brother and her brother's girlfriend, and one of her other brothers, and of course her and I. So we filled out that pew. And it was a great service, nothing I hadn't heard before, but it was a very appropriate sermon on love, my favorite subject. And it was from the famous love passage in the Christian Bible, 1 Corinthians chapter 13. And so when the sermon was completed, they finished up the service with some worship songs about love. And as the song was ending, the pastor began to shake and speak in tongues, is what they call it. And for those of you unfamiliar with that, the best way I can explain it is that the Spirit of the Creator drops down, fills someone up with that beautiful love energy so much that the person like begins to speak out in an unknown tongue. And then after that, after they're done, then the interpretation also comes through for the congregation to understand what was being said. And it's usually a message for the church body of people that are present. And everyone bows their head and closes their eyes waiting for the message because, you know, it's a very holy thing that's happening. So and then of course we were all standing up because we had just finished singing. So as I stood there with my eyes closed, with everyone else, anticipating the message along with, these other 300 or more people, the pastor stopped speaking in tongues and you could hear a pin drop. And then I heard the pastor ask, "What is the name of that young man in the corner?" And as I looked up to see who he was talking about, he was looking right at me. And my friend's mother called out my name to him. Yeah, I was floored, but I also was a bit scared. I thought, oh, here we go. God is about to bust me out in front of everyone. And then the pastor said, "God has a message for you." And I lifted my hands to the sky and surrendered to the Creator, knowing that if it took him outing me in front of all these strangers about what had happened, then so be it. I would take whatever punishment or whatever had to happen in order for me to be forgiven. And then the pastor said, "God says, I have forgiven you. I will show you my will for your life. Just continue seeking after me. You'll feel the fire of my presence this night." And he answered a few other things, the things that I had asked for, he answered exactly that night before I had left. As I prayed to him, he answered exactly in the order that I had prayed. And in that moment, I did feel a flood of energy flow down into me through my arms and fill up my body. And I was filled with that beautiful, unconditional love energy of the Creator. A semi-truck probably could have hit me in that moment. I don't think I would have felt it. I mean, he answered my prayers that I had told him in private. He answered through this pastor who did not know me. I did not know them, in front of a church hours away from where I had lived. So no one can ever tell me that the Creator does not exist. There was no way this could have happened because I hadn't even prayed out loud, when I asked those things. So no one was bugging my room or anything. Now, I feel very blessed to have had that experience happen to me. And some people state they wish they could also have those experiences happen to them where messages come through so clear, right? And I get that. I often reply, though, maybe you listen well enough that God doesn't feel like they have to hit you upside your head with a 2x4 like he did me in that moment. And I know God is very patient, so they didn't grow tired of me asking for forgiveness, but maybe the rest of heaven was like, can you please tell him you forgive him so he'll shut up about it? And I have so much more to tell you about the steps that occurred after this and how forgiveness was something that really wasn't needed, but a necessary step to witness and experience so I could release myself from the clutches of self-judgment. In this next episode, we'll talk about some of the important first steps of my journey of moving out of chaos and toward cozy. So until next time, remember every second of every moment of our lives that we are eternally and unconditionally loved by the Mother and Father of all things, our Creator, and of course, I love you too. So hang in there and take care of you. We'll see you soon.